Very good morning, everyone, and welcome to our live fireside chat. Really exciting to be sharing some of the insights around water utilities with all of you this morning. Apologies there were a few technical issues there, but all sorted and ready for action. So it's great to see that we've got over 50 people that have joined us for or have registered for this webinar on water utilities today from 4 different countries. So thanks obviously for your time, and even more special to have our 3 panelists join us today with over, sorry to give you guys ages away, but over 9 decades of experience within the water utility space. So it's going to be really fascinating to listen to their insights and wealth of knowledge as they share that with us today. Just to give you a quick high level on how the session is going to work today, we will look at, I'll introduce the panelists. Then we really want to make the session as guest-centric, so please get your questions through. We're going to try to handle them. There is a place within the webinar where you can send through your questions, and we're going to do our best to answer those throughout the session today. Following that, we're going to look at a quick introduction to Riyo and how that fits into the water utility space, and then really move into what are the purpose of water utilities, what services are the water utilities delivering, what are the challenges that they're currently facing, and how technology is going to play a role in service delivery. And then finally, finishing off with just a bit of a futuristic look at service delivery within the water utility space. So without further ado, I'd like to move on to introducing our guest speakers. We have Wayne McGlone, who I've actually had the privilege and been lucky enough to work with. He's taught me a great deal about the water industry. He has an extensive knowledge and background of customer services within the water industry. He's worked across many divisions at Southeast Water, from the core centers to implementing CRM systems and billing systems for Southeast Water, and now holds the position of GM at Southeast Water's Priority Plumbing. The business provides plumbing services to various Southeast Water stakeholders, industry, and also to Southeast Water's residential customers. We've got Gerald Fitzgibbon, who has worked globally in leadership roles with public and private sector utility service providers. He brings a strategic focus and collaborative mindset to natural and built asset management and service delivery business. Then we've got David. David joins us. He spent 2 decades at Water Corp and has moved on actually in this quite tricky climate, and luckily enough made it to Tassie in the end. But David is heading as the GM of service delivery at Tas Water now. So he will give us some really interesting insights, having worked at 2 of the large utility businesses in Australia. So moving on to where Riyo fits in. Riyo has very much been working with Southeast Water's Priority Plumbing with Wayne in changing the game that they deliver services. Wayne's very much focused on the customer experience as well as the user experience in delivering a quality service. So really around the outcomes and efficiency gains that software can help with in terms of service delivery. And yeah, it's been a great privilege to work with Southeast Water, and I think we're really starting to see some of the benefits that technology can offer when adopted and implemented correctly. So moving on to, while we're all here, obviously not to listen to me, but to actually listen to the guys who have a great knowledge on the water industry space. And I think we'll get going with looking at the purpose of water utilities. But on that, I know we chatted last week, and David, if you could probably lead here. I thought it was really interesting, your perspective around having worked at Water Corp and now at Tas Water, and then obviously having quite good insights into SA Water about their structure, and then moving on to what the purpose of those water utilities companies is.
Thanks, Pat. Yeah, so just a little bit of background. I suppose I spent 22 years at Water Corp and in Western Australia, and a lot of those years were spent in regional Western Australia. And having spent that time and then coming to Tas Water, what I suppose has struck me is there's a lot of similarities, particularly in many of the water supplies, particularly the water supplies that are, or the water utilities that are catchment to tap water utilities. So this is Water Corporation, Tas Water, SA Water, Power and Water, and many of those utilities that are actually really looking after water supplies right through from source through to treatment, right through to the customer, and then vice versa with wastewater systems. So I think one of the things I've seen is that the consistency in the issues across some of those utilities, consistency in we're all trying to do the same thing in terms of some of the future systems and processes, information and technology we're looking at across those utilities, and that no one's really that unique. I suppose was probably the takeaway I've taken. I've come across from Water Corp, and many of the issues that Tas Water face are very, very similar. And I guess one of the challenges when we look at the water utilities and how they're structured, and we have really good, associations, AWA, WASA, and those sorts of things, is how do we connect in a way that we end up not all having to invent our own things differently, but in some form through through those connections or through the way we work together, that we can deliver very similar outcomes and perhaps get the best results for everyone, as opposed to everyone running off and trying to do their own thing. So it's probably one of the major insights I've seen coming across to Tas Water.
Yeah, really interesting insights there. And I mean, I know, and thanks for all that. And Wade, I know you touched on from a sort of purpose perspective, it really does come down to delivering quality water and the health of the people's that are absolute paramount. Would you say that is really the purpose of, like, in your experience at Southeast Water?
Well, I think that's why water companies were established in the first place. Was there were, particularly in Melbourne, big issues with waste disposal and also provision of safe quality drinking water. But we've changed a little bit now. I think that seems to be a bit of a given with the customers. They expect water companies to perform highly in those areas, but they're interested now, I think, customers, in what does the water company do with the environment? How does the water company work with me about making a better community? And what's the water company do for me, rather than to just supply the water main? And what can it do for me in the home when I have issues? So we're changing a little bit in the focus, mainly through what our customers' expectations are. And they're changing all the time. And the digital changes in the world have certainly put challenges out to water companies to address customers' needs and look at new issues.
And if I could chip in there too, gents, I mean, I totally agree. I think in the case of Melbourne Water, for example, where I worked for 3.5 years up until a couple of months ago, Melbourne Water, who works with its principal customers of the retail water companies, of which Southeast Water is one, as is City West Water and Yarra Valley Water. But there's it's very much a strategy around how Melbourne Water, who's accountable for managing catchments and bulk provision of water service, sewerage service, but also flood drainage and waterway management, how someone like Melbourne Water works not only with its retail water customers, but also the broader community of stakeholders, the 38 municipal councils in Melbourne, in terms of how to manage land assets in particular, waterways particularly, but also looking at how Melbourne Water's land assets can be used for amenities, for, with pressures of population growth. How can Melbourne Water be a good corporate citizen and make sure that all stakeholders get access to land for amenity, for longitudinal parks on pipe tracks, etc., etc. So, I think the water utility world has become much more complex and integrated, certainly in the last 10 or so years.
Cool. And Yeah, I mean, that's great insight so far. We just had our first question come through, and I think it fits in here. So let me just fire this one for you guys, and feel free to answer. Just from an anonymous attendee, and he says, with respect to climate change and carbon emissions reductions that many authorities are signing up to, what benchmarking data and efficiency programs are you seeing as having potential to be embraced?
So maybe I can launch off with that one. Again, it draws on that that broader remit for water companies around how they interface with other stakeholders in their world, as I said, councils. With regard to the climate change, I mean, I think speaking on behalf of the water industry, there are two major challenges for water companies moving forward. One is climate change. The other one is population growth, assuming that at some point COVID will reset that bar. Melbourne Water in particular, but also working with the retail water companies in Melbourne, has a number of strategies around carbon reduction, getting to carbon neutral by 2030. And there's been a lot of effort there in terms of not only looking at obviously demand reduction in terms of energy efficiency, but also looking at potential for using of solar arrays on land, looking at co-digestion and co-generation to take waste, turn it into energy, and contribute to the supply of the grid. And I know a number of in fact, most utilities across the country are looking at similar areas. And for example, Melbourne Water is the second largest consumer of electricity in the state of Victoria. We report our emissions, like most large organisations, to the federal government. So there's an ongoing program of reduction of demand, of cogeneration, of contributing, and also the use of technologies like mini hydros on running off water mains and that sort of stuff. There's a fairly big comprehensive program that's reported through the usual government channels.
Great answer there, Gerald. And I think if it's all right, we'll segue into, I know we've got to be a bit conscious of time here. We've got only scheduled 45 minutes in, and I know you guys could talk for days on a lot of these topics, but just to segue into service delivery and what that looks like within the water utility industry. I don't know, Wayne, would you like to kick us off here? Just interested in your thoughts around how Southeast Water is slightly different, it would seem, in the way that they're structured and delivering services out of sort of their mainframe infrastructure and even into the residential properties. And that's obviously where you're very much involved.
Yeah, well, there's been a decision made at Southeast Water that we come up with a lot of solutions for issues that are consistent across water companies. And so we've got a commercialisation arm called IOTA, which looks at solutions in pressure sewer, which reduces costs and can be more efficient. Also in digital metering, my plumbing grid is managed by IOTA, so therefore we can reach into the home and offer a service to a customer, a residential customer or industrial customer. We're connecting their water supply, or if they have issues in the home. So rather than a customer ringing up and saying, I've got a leak in my water, what do I do? And we say, just go out and find yourself a plumber. We can offer that, plus also offer they can use our services as well. And we can then tie that through with digital metering, identifying leaks, notifying customers immediately, fixing up their service with them, and then arranging to adjust their accounts. So those sorts of service deliveries we're looking at going forward with a rollout of digital meters. And IOTA is a little bit unique in the fact that we collaborate with a lot of Victorian water companies and other water companies where we share the information and we pilot and we build products together with those companies. So we have a product, we'll lend it to the company, they'll run with it, they'll test it, they'll see how it goes, they'll provide advice, and then we refine that product until it becomes commercial. And then we can take that product overseas to New Zealand. We're in New Zealand at the moment. We're also in Fiji. We're also in Ireland. So we're able to take the technology from Australia outside of the borders. So there's one little structure difference that we have in service delivery to other water utilities at the moment. And I think the big one with water utilities at the moment is also focusing on how well we engage with customers. What are we doing differently to make sure that the customer's got some buy-in with the customer direction of an organisation? Years ago, water companies were always based around an act or an act of some kind, a water act of some kind, very directive, and it was always good for you just to eat it, Freddie. So now we're looking at how we can work with customers to make better solutions.
Yeah, really interesting point there. I mean, maybe passing it on to Gerald or David, in terms of the structure, obviously what Wayne's touched on there, often Tas Water or Melbourne Water, they essentially would be the customer, because the contractor would obviously be delivering services, especially on the big assets like the desalination plants or the sewer plants. And then Melbourne Water is actually, would you say that they are the customer? And then your focus isn't really much just the odd person in public who has a residential house, for example.
I mean, I can start, Gerald, if you want.
Yeah, go.
I guess look, there was some really interesting. What does it look like in the utilities? And there's many different operating models that utilities can adopt, and they're often driven by different arrangements, different requirements. Often locality will drive a water model. If you're in a small town in the middle of nowhere, you might end up with a very basic water model. If you're in a place like Perth, which has undergone tremendous climate change, and picking up on the last point, so for the last 20 years they've really focused on customer education to shift and drive down water demand so that their investments don't end up impacting the cost of water. There's economy of scale. So if you look in Tasmania, you can look at a city like Hobart. We can run a different operating model. We might be able to go to a more alliance operating model versus if you're out in the northwest of Tasmania in a very small town, you're really, that's quite remote. You might end up looking at a model where you try and have operators on the ground for very simple to do the sort of simpler tasks, less complex tasks, and the more complex tasks you might invite people in. Or you might go to a model in SA where they've gone to a full alliance across their operational areas. So none of those models are essentially wrong or right. I think often are driven by timing, circumstance, political drivers, and the maturity of the service provider in general. So, and you can see that, say, with South East Water, that a very mature organisation that's now able to carve greater niches in the customer area around metering and smart metering and things like Aquaviro and places like that. So I can see that the maturity of organisations and often the maturity of the customer journey plays a very strong role in what the utility looks like in terms of delivering those particular services to customers.
And just to build on David's comments, I think in the context of Melbourne, the structure of the utility business in Melbourne was originally established 25 years ago as a platform to lead to privatisation. Actually, it was set up by the Kennett government. So in 1995, what was one large amorphous organisation was broken up into four pieces: Melbourne Water providing bulk water, wastewater, drainage, and waterways management services to three direct customers in the sense of South East Water, City West Water, and Yarra Valley Water, plus the regional councils that I mentioned before in terms of providing drainage services. So in Melbourne Water has a view of customers, the direct customers, but ultimately working with their customers, the population of Melbourne, which ultimately are the customers that pay the bills that drive the whole economic cycle of this model. This is not unlike the structure in Southeast Queensland, where you have Southeast SEQ Water providing bulk services to retailers in the southeast corner of Queensland.
Great. Well, thanks for that, guys. I think just moving on and being wary of time, we've got two more questions that come in, one from Will and another one from an anonymous. So I think, Will, if you don't mind, we'll touch on yours when we get into the technology side of things. But as we segue into the challenges with service delivery within the water utility space, there's a relevant question here that talks to the collaboration within in the market, and where do you think we are in regards to collaborating actively and sharing these learnings with the focus on service delivery in terms of common causes of failures, maintenance strategies, and so on? There's a sense of rework, starting from scratch or reinventing the wheel when it comes to assets and asset management and service delivery. What are your thoughts on this? So I know in our previous chat, Gerald, this was one of the challenges that you raised, so I'll let you lead the way on this one.
Yeah, look, I think both Wayne and David had mentioned that a lot of the common issues that water utilities face are very much common across the country, in fact, globally. In the context of Melbourne, Melbourne has 4 service strategies. They're 50-year strategies now for water, sewage, flood, drainage, and waterways management. All of those service strategies refer to integrated water management. So there's been a lot discussed about integrated water management. It's essentially seen as one of the key approaches to addressing climate change and population growth. Integrated implies that you have a collaborative single view of how you manage, in this case, water across a catchment. And in the context of Melbourne, where you've got 4 businesses managing those services, it really is ultimately about getting a better common approach to sharing information, on agreeing and aligning planning and service delivery planning, making sure that you have information systems that can connect and share with each other, whether that's SCADA, whether that's sharing asset information data. And in the case of this 25-year-old model, even challenging the interfaces between the various organisations, as in, is Melbourne Water doing enough, too much? Can the retail water companies better balance? Are they better placed to provide service in some areas that Melbourne Water are currently doing, and vice versa? So that requires a global conversation. Collaboration is the key, and that really is obviously alignment around understanding that where we're going with the service delivery, having common objectives and most importantly, common metrics and measures, how we share that information, and making sure that we have integrated programs of work that ultimately deliver on that common view. So integrated water management is the future. Getting there is very much around collaboration.
Okay, I mean, and do you want to add anything on that, David or Wayne?
I can add a little bit, I suppose. It's the only thing I agree with Gerald that collaboration is really important. I think under water utilities, understanding where they are in the journey. So I've come from one utility that has, probably in some parts of the journey, particularly around climate change, and building customer knowledge around that is probably further on the journey than where TasWater is, and that's not any fault of TasWater's. It's just that TasWater hasn't had the same challenges thrown up around climate change, for example. So those challenges are all about where you are on the journey, and I see the opportunity for places like TasWater and other utilities that may still challenged by just getting some of the basic, the basic system requirements to provide water safely and take, wastewater away safely, is about recognising where they are on the journey and then looking to other utilities. So I think I said something before, water utilities don't necessarily have to be inventors of everything, but they need to be really intelligent followers of good solutions. And if you can do that, then you will find that you can integrate those solutions like integrated water cycle management without having to reinvent the wheel. So being intelligent followers is a really important aspect for maturing water utilities.
Yeah, that's a great point, because there seems to be quite a few water bodies out there that are obviously trying to share information with people, but some of it, what I've found in chatting to numerous of the utility businesses, is that from a technology standpoint, there's sometimes a sort of, that's maybe where there could be more sharing. I mean, especially around one of the, I won't mention the software's name, but a big asset management solution where the mobility might not be as strong as possible. And another water utility has gone ahead and built that mobility side of things to be able to share that with the other utilities. I think there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, because essentially water utilities are doing a lot of the same stuff. So when you're looking across the if I'm looking across the ditch to Melbourne Water or looking across the Nullarbor, I can see a lot of similarities in the outcomes we're after. And so when you look at it and say, well, what have they done to achieve that outcome? Maybe that's something we can just pick up and do here. Obviously, there's nuances and circumstances that are localized, but the general is very similar.
Because from a regulatory perspective, it is very much similar across the board because it's set by national legislation. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. I think different. One of the challenges that, and Gerald and Wayne can comment as well, but one of the challenges I've seen come across is the variance in regulation, not so much in what they're trying to achieve, but what sort of skill sets the regulators have got. And what sort of, I can't think of a better word, the teeth that the regulator have got to actually apply the regulations. And then also sometimes the power of the utility as an organisation within that context. So that's the view I've had. I'm sure that Gerald and Wayne have got some views as well.
Yeah, if I could maybe just jump in quickly, the federal government's fascinated by this. The Productivity Commission, for example, published a report in March this year around what are the barriers to this integrated water cycle management, and some of the key barriers that come up are regulatory barriers. For example, in Victoria, the use of recycled water for potable or semi-potable purposes is not considered appropriate. For example, which flies. I think I'm pretty sure in WA, and I know in other states that's not the case. That the Commission also pointed out there's a lack of integrated planning, as in getting multiple authorities to work together to come up with a common integrated plan. When all the utilities, certainly in Victoria, report through the Essential Service Commission, they put in a 5-year plan. It's reviewed, but how those plans integrate is an area for opportunity, and how we collect data, how we share data, the analytics tools and reporting, the common tools of the trade. I think there's a lot of opportunity, which David and Wayne have mentioned, to share those more and more. And we're all semi-government authorities, or were semi-government authorities, so that commercial edge is not as sharp as it would be in private sector. So there's a lot of opportunity there to standardise the way we do a lot of this data collection, analytics, and reporting with regard to driving forward and address some of these issues.
Yeah, and I mean, just from referring back to our discussion last week, I think a lot of you're obviously driving to get these strategies up and running. It's a lot easier, or the strategy is one thing, but getting it implemented is a whole other ballgame.
Exactly.
And Wayne, you really touched on this in terms of even finding the right talent and contractors to do the roles, and then having that change management piece, and how important that is in terms of delivering the right outcomes that you're after. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, that's true. When you decide to do a strategy and it's a change in direction, there's a lot goes with it. And you need to have the right people, you need to have the right investment, and you need to have the guts to see it through. Sometimes it's a little hard because it's if you're changing, say, to a new CRM, which involves a complete change to the way you're doing things. Like at South East Water, we have a CRM, Salesforce, which we put in. We have a web portal where customers can do their own transactions. And then when they do their transactions, they're actually talking to our systems. Well, there's no interference by us. We work on the exception. So having the challenge to make changes and make it more possible for people to do things for themselves, customers, challenges a lot of established thinking and a lot of mindsets that has to be this way. The customer doesn't know what they're doing. So you need the right skill set, you need the right change management programs, you need to keep the customer on board, you need the guts, and you also need to make sure you're financed well, because the last thing you want to do is run out of money halfway through a project and you've got half of where you want to get to rather than get the whole product in.
Yeah, exactly right. Very good insights there. We're again at time, so we're going to move on from the challenges into the technology and how technologies are helping us overcome some of these service delivery challenges. And before we get in there, we've got a question from Will Clooney, who just asked, how are water utilities adopting digital technologies to improve customer experience? And then we'll get to the second part of this question. So let's maybe just start with that. I don't know who wants to kick us off.
I can kick off a little bit with that. So at South East Water, we're looking at obviously the education of the customer, what they're using in the home, how they use water. And so we have identified 5 different customer types: the savvy customer, or the customer who just doesn't care, the customer who wants more information. So there's different types of customer profiles that we work towards. With those profiles, we're using setting our network up to be a digital network right across from the water main with alerts and alarms right through to the home with a digital meter in the home. And we're also looking at experimentation with the Aqua Revo site, where there's 450 homes where they have rainwater to hot water systems, where we're able to conserve up to 60 to 70% of normal drinking water that goes into the home by using recycled water in the home and other system efficiencies. So a lot of that work means working with the customers. As Jared said before, that the regulations about using rainwater to hot water in the city are different to in the country. So we've got to make sure we get all the departments lined up, work with the developers. My part of the organisation, Priority Plumbing, who we have the privilege of putting those rain and hot water services in, and also working closely with the livability team at South East Water. All of this is to try and make the customer's experience better in the home. They know more, we can make them more water efficient. If you think about the cost of building a desalination plant versus the cost of treating water in the home or having rainwater to hot water systems that can work and saving water, it works out that you don't have to spend so much infrastructure costs on desalination plants if you roll that on a large scale. And so there's a lot of experiments that we're doing at South East Water to make sure we're working with customers so they can have better management of their accounts, better working with us about how they can improve the impact on the environment. And we've got one coming up soon. It's called, in the city, it's called Docklands. There's going to be 110,000 people living in that part of the city, where we're looking at doing a whole infrastructure change, where we're using stormwater treatment for localised streets, areas in buildings, capturing water off the roofs and on panels, solar panelling, to make that whole new site energy efficient and better for the future. So that's some of the technology that we're doing to make the journey better for customers. As you know, Pat, we're working with Riyo, and part of the Riyo experience is obviously that the customers, like the pizza man, get the notification, I'm on the way. They can track the plumber. They can see the plumber when they get on site. They let the plumber lets them know when they're finished. They communicate with the plumber along the way, and at the end they can give a survey on the plumber's performance and say how well we're doing or where we can improve. So we're really about engaging customers with the technology that's becoming available today.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the Uberification of the service industry. But I mean, it's just also so great touching on that point, Wayne. I mean, there was minimal feedback before we got involved with the Riyo solution, but it's so great to see, like, even the plumbers getting sort of their just reward and sort of being identified as doing a really good job. I mean, we've seen those ratings and reviews coming in for Priority Plumbing, and it's just 5-star after 5-star with great reports. So I think having that visibility also goes a long way in creating a confidence within the organization, which is awesome to see. If I can just go on to, Will's got a second part of his question, and it's around how do the water utilities industry compare to the other utilities, so electricity and gas?
It's a good question. I can answer. It's interesting. I went to a conference a couple of years ago when we could fly to Hong Kong to a Schneider conference, and I suppose what struck me over there was that the water utilities were probably behind some of the technologies that I'd saw in the oil and gas and the energy utilities. Certainly in the mining sector in WA, Water Corp was learning quite a bit off the mining companies about, particularly around efficiencies within the utility. And I think that was probably the bit that I was looking at from a technology perspective. How can we improve our asset? How can we maximise our asset life or minimise whole of life cost of assets, which ultimately then mean that the customer gets a benefit. And so those sorts of technologies, I think there's a lot that the water utilities can learn, particularly around maintenance, how to set up crews, how to run efficient outsourcing and insourcing models. What does that look like? When to do things, when not to do things, prioritise of works, prioritise investments. Look at different operating models that in and around those investments. For example, large desalination plants, should they be can they be private partnership solutions? So I think there's a lot of utilities have been born out of originally out of government agencies, and so they've come with a kind of traditional government approaches. And probably what we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years, or perhaps a bit longer, is the utilities starting to shift into some of those I suppose, other operating models that will improve the efficiency of the utility in the long term.
Yeah. And I mean, I know something that you've mentioned before, Gerald, is about you can get these sort of carried away with too sophisticated software solutions. That you mentioned that they were like Lamborghinis of software solutions, but often you just need to focus on critical data and what's really going to make the difference in delivering a better outcome. And that's something that you sort of brought into from your global experience into Melbourne Order.
Exactly. I've seen it in New York. Massive investment in asset management software. Not enough investment in the change management. Not enough investment in the business processes behind services lifecycle. So the planning, the implementing, the operating review component of how you manage services through assets. Basically buy a piece of software, embed it as a piece of software and say, here you go. Good luck with that, people. And as a result, for example, New York, and I've seen it in Australia, you end up with very expensive systems that are underutilized and end up being used to print out work orders. There's very limited data on the work orders. There's very limited data coming back as part of the maintenance regime in terms of how the assets perform in their condition. So a lot of these systems are being rolled out without really robust change management processes to embed a shift in culture, accountability, and even a continuous improved perspective around how you manage an asset lifecycle as opposed to run a piece of software. And I think that's a really common experience globally and certainly in Australia.
Okay, I can talk from a customer service point of view because we're a retailer. So we benchmark how well we go against electricity companies and gas companies in our customer service. And what I know is we benchmark well against those companies. And the test, of course, is to ring up one of those companies and see what the service is like compared to the service that we offer. So we get ratings back, about 400 surveys every week from our customers about our particular service in our contact centre. And we compare heavily against the services from other utilities, of course, who've moved their contact centres offshore. That could be in another country. They have issues. And, in the past, as I ran the contact centre for many years, I used to have a bit of a laugh and enjoy the fact that the performance issues that they had in some of the other electricity companies and gas companies made it a little easy for me. Because, we would answer our calls within 30 seconds, 2 minutes longest wait, where you could be waiting 10 minutes. But of course, that doesn't mean we don't provide a self-service option for customers, that we've invested heavily in letting customers do their transactions themselves online. And we had a great take up on that.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for the feedback there. And I think we've answered Will's question really thoroughly there. Probably just finishing off on the technology side of things. Everyone obviously is looking to the single source of truth, making sure that your systems are connected. And I know, Gerald, you touched on this earlier. Is integration something that is being achieved within the water utility space, or do you think there's still a long way to go in terms of getting the systems to talk to each other?
Probably a bit case by case or utility by utility, but I think at the risk of throwing a generalization out there, I think we've still got a fair way to go, particularly, as I mentioned, around the idea that if you're talking about integrated water management, that approach to integration pushes across the service boundaries of many utilities. So better common ways of collecting, analysing, sharing data would be part of that drive in the future as well.
Yeah, and I suppose it's also because you're dealing with customer information, it also raises security concerns and data sovereignty concerns. So these are all sort of things that you're going to have to take into consideration when looking at rolling out any of these projects, which creates an even bigger project in itself.
I think Gerald's right. I think that integration is an area of growth and education and learning for all water companies. I know when you move to a digital meter, you're getting half-hour reads every day instead of one read every 3 months. So we're going to have lots of data and lots of information and data management, data mining, understanding the mechanics of what the data is about and getting the advantage of that data is an area that I think is relatively new to us. We've had some experience, but we're still relatively new, and it's going to be the challenge going forward, obviously, to utilise that data in the best way.
Yeah, it's a good point. Maybe if I could just add quickly on that, in terms of data sharing, one of the big pieces of feedback for an organisation like Melbourne Water was transparency of sharing big data to not only customers, but all more generally the greater public. In the old days, sharing information around flood overlays, for example, or water quality, it was burn a CD, stick it in the post, and send it to someone. And then now there's a focus around creating big data portals where, depending on who you are and your need, you can get access to some of that data online, and that requires a certain shift in culture and a certain appetite to being a bit vulnerable, because I think traditional engineers have kept a lot of their data to themselves, mostly because, it was their data. And secondly, it's concern about, third parties looking at it. So I think as we move forward, trying to address these key issues of climate change and population growth, having third parties actually be able to access data and look at data and approach utilities to say, hey, we've been looking at this data set and we think we've found something. Can we come and talk to you? I think that's also part of the future culture of better collaboration, no matter where it comes from.
Great. Awesome. So I think we are sort of getting to the end of the session here, so we'll have to move on, but really interesting insights into the technology in this space. So moving on to to looking into the future of service objectives and improvements. There are no questions. I mean, we've got another one in, but it's around digital and smart metering initiatives, but wants to take it offline, so we'll leave that at that. Looking at the future of service delivery and ongoing improvement, Wayne, you mentioned build and enhance resource and technological capability to be ready for market changes. Would you please sort of give us a bit more into that thought there?
Well, I think obviously we're looking at things change rapidly, don't they? Last year we were in fires. Looks like we're going to have floods this year. We know we're going to be doubling the population of Melbourne. We know the customers' expectations are changing all the time, and are we keeping up, or are we becoming irrelevant? As a water retailer, in the end, when you get the data, do we need to sell that data? Do we need to have the customer with the data? Or do we amalgamate with electricity companies and gas companies and provide a single source of service? Lots of challenges, lots of pathways we could take. Obviously, we need the right people as well. We've got a changing workforce. When I first started working, the idea was to get a job, and if you had a job, you were doing pretty well. That seems to be going back that way a little bit because of the COVID. But my children, they go into a place and they look at what the advantage of the place is going to be to them, and going forward, how they can use their skills in that place. So working models where people become more contracted towards an end goal rather than just going in and doing a job, more solutions. I think it's going to be, you have to be ready to be agile and adapt to the demands and changes that are going to come forward going into the future. And we need technology that can do that for us as well. Nothing worse than saying, ringing someone and you hear that the system's slow and I can't get this done because we have a very ordinary system. As a customer, I always ask, well, why haven't you fixed your system?
Yeah, exactly. And really interested to hear your thoughts here, David, around consistency. I don't know, in terms of the TAS water model, if you can just talk us through that, how there's been changes there, trying to get consistency through the organisation.
Sure. Yeah, and I think I touched on this earlier around the journey that all the different utilities are on. So, you know, TAS Water is a very young organisation in terms of running the whole of the state's water supplies. If we only go back sort of 15 or so years, it was run by 29 different councils. So you've seen quite an adaptive change over the last 15 years about trying to build a consistent approach to how we approach water and wastewater services, right through from water quality to security, to charging, to metering. We had some councils only 10, 15 years ago that weren't even metering their water supplies to their customers, to the change in billing structures for the customer. It used to all come under a council rate. To the different safety records, to the age profiles of those particular workforces, and the various localities that have been built, the quality of the assets that have been built. So a really, really diverse kind of grouping together. And look, these circumstances have been the same in other parts of Australia. I know, you know, Queensland's sort of waxed and waned over various shapes and sizes and structures of models. And so we've seen, you know, we've had to be adaptive and agile in just to get back to probably what maybe a water corporation looked like 10 or 15 years ago, in terms of where we're at. So the journey often drives the service objectives. So if you're a water supplier along the journey where you've got water security, where you've got really robust systems in play, then you can start to look at the next gen of what that integrated water cycle planning looks like and how you can sort of build on those successes. So it's really important when you look to the future and you look at different utilities, you need to look at where their journey is and where they are at this point in time and what their next 5 or 10 years looks like, all with a common view to get that consistent outcome at the end, which is best for customer. And that journey also includes how you bring the customer along that journey. I think Wayne's touched on a number of points about bringing customers in South East Water along the journey of integrated water cycle management and things like Aquaviro, which I've seen, Wayne. Aquaviro are going to, you know, really, you know, provide us another step change in, you know, the customer interface back into the utility. Whereas, you know, a place like TAS Water, that's still, you know, maybe still some years away as we just build to get water security, water billing, wastewater servicing and good environmental outcomes. So I think when I'm looking to the future, I'm looking where are we on the journey? What can we learn from other utilities who might be a little bit further on the journey? And so we can build consistency inside not only our utility, but utilities across Australia.
Yeah, very well said. That was very insightful. Thanks for that. And well, I know we sort of out of time here, so I think if we'll wrap up with you, Gerald, with the last question, just looking around sort of your objective and improvements, and that was around digital strategy and automation plans. Would you like to share some thoughts there?
Yes, I would. Look, it's a very very powerful enabler to get to that future state that we've talked about, where you look at water as based on the end requirements of the customer. You look at options for different water sources, and to get that done and to build better collaboration and better understanding what's happening in the system. And in my previous role with Melbourne Water, there's a big focus on implementing the digital strategy, which was composed of a number of key elements. The first element was really the so-called intelligent water network enablement. So it's systems and processes and tools like, you know, analytics tools that the business can use and share. the adoption of AI type algorithms, and that's happening in a number of areas, from whether it's from looking at drainage systems through to interpreting CCTV condition monitoring of scanning of sewers and pipes and the like, setting up digital engineering for engineering drawings interface with asset management systems, that a more structured approach to the use of IoT type devices, and I mentioned already the big data portals. So part of that will include some fairly innovative automation with regard to the water system, and that's happening as we speak. There's been a contract to automate how the water supply system across Melbourne supplies water to the regional water the retail water companies, using algorithms based on historic consumption records, looking at data around things like temperature, so that the system can be set up to optimize things like tank levels, pumping levels, streamline flow through treatment plants. That's being rolled out on water as you speak, and sewage would be the next part. The use of improving plant-based AI type tools in things like pumping systems. We've used Python script, for example, to look at what the load is on pumps and switch on and switch off pumps to reduce the cost of pumping. In the land-based world, the drainage systems, Melbourne has an extensive drainage system that provides drainage bulk services to councils whose systems connect to the central spine. A lot of that drainage system is without eyes and ears. There are no SCADA on the drainage system typically. There are some measurements around flood levels where it connects to rivers, but building essentially a visualization system based on IoT type technology and interfacing with SCADA is in the pipeline. And then last but not least, the catchments. I mean, Melbourne's water supply is founded, 60% of its supply comes from catchments in the Yarra Ranges. How can we improve risk management around those catchments, not only in terms of how they're performing, in terms of runoff water quality, but in terms of potential fire risk, pest risk, deer, etc. So again, looking at IoT and SCADA type devices to better integrate and understand what's happening out there. So it's quite a big program of work that will help enable better management of those integrated water challenges across catchments and across utility businesses. And again, how do we share this data? How do we integrate it with for example, the retail water companies? Big deal, big issues, big challenges, but it's a key enabler for the future.
Yeah, great answer there, Gerald, and thanks very much. And I see a whole lot of comments are coming through. People obviously having to drop off because of the timings, but just saying so grateful for your guys' insights. It's been a really interesting session. I mean, it's clear your guys' passion in the industry and the knowledge you guys have acquired over decades of experience. And thanks so much for sharing that with us. Yeah, I've absolutely loved the session, and I know everyone who's joined us too has. So thank you to Gerald, Wayne, and David for your incredible insights. I really do appreciate it. And if anyone needs more information, please feel free to reach out to myself. You can just go to the Riyo website and send a message through there. Or I'm not sure if you've got my personal details, please feel free to reach out. I know some of the guys on the call are wanting to be introduced to you guys offline, so I'll also facilitate that. But just again to the panelists, geez, that was really special. So thanks so much for sharing all your insights with us today.